Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out to this event tonight. We're very excited about it, and we're very excited that you're here. My name is Debbie Marion. I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Metro West node of 350 Mass. And 350 Mass, if you don't already know this, is a statewide network. We are building a powerful statewide movement to end the destructive dominance of the fossil fuel industry and transition to a just, equitable, and clean energy economy. That is what we advocate for, and we consider ourselves activists. And we hope you all consider yourself to be activists just by being here tonight. We have a very exciting program for you. We're very honored to have our guest speakers, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Sabina to introduce them.
Thank you, Debbie. Before I introduce our guests, I was actually asked to give everyone a brief overview of why we're here and where we are now with respect to the climate legislation in Massachusetts. And I'm sure many of you know about the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was signed into law in 2008 under then Governor Deval Patrick, a Democrat. That law required us to set economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, leading to minus 80% by 2050. And after that, we got the Solarize program and net metering, for example, but it did not go far enough. Okay, one sec, I have to mute people here. Sorry, the muting other people is not working for some reason. I apologize. So please, everyone, mute yourself because you're making noises and that disturbs everyone. All right. So, since it did not go far enough, climate activists and advocates, both our speakers, actively among them, kept pushing for ways that we would actually decarbonize our economy. And this push resulted in the bill that is called an Act Creating a Next Generation Roadmap for Massachusetts Climate Policy. It was quite a thriller to watch it come about, as it first had to contend with COVID in the summer of 2020, and then finally was passed by the House and the Senate at the end of 2020, and there was a conference committee which Senator Barrett shepherded through, and then the governor vetoed it. But the Senate and House brought it immediately back to the floor in the new session, and after Governor Baker demanded changes to it, it was finally signed into law on March 26, 2021. Hallelujah. So what does this bill do? I'm going to try to summarize it from a website. I didn't do this myself, in as non-legislative speak as possible. It is basically a blueprint for a map that shows us how we can reach decarbonization, but we still need to bring it to life with action. So here's what it does do. It requires that Massachusetts gets to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So a lot faster than the Global Warming Solutions Act, which only got us 80% of the way. It also speeds up emissions reductions for 2030, and it requires emissions limits set every 5 years. So what else does it do? Gail, please silence your microphone. What else does it do? It requires that the Department of Energy Resources, called DOER, establish a brand new opt-in net zero stretch building code within 18 months. Because apart from a transportation, our leaky fossil fuel buildings are one of the biggest challenges for decarbonization. It makes DOER responsible for updating the existing stretch energy code, which has already been adopted by over 80% of Massachusetts communities. And it adds DOER and energy experts to the board that implements building codes and sets term limits for board members. It also requires that the cost of climate change on society be part of the Mass Save 3-year energy efficiency plan cost benefit analysis. Then it establishes appliance efficiency standards for 17 residential and commercial products, saving consumer costs on energy and water bills while cutting emissions. Most importantly, it for the first time defines environmental justice populations in state statute. The definition of environmental burden for key permit reviews includes climate change for the first time. It ensures increased outreach to environmental justice populations and requires more engagement from state agencies as they carry out their duties. So the roadmap bill also increases the required percentage of Massachusetts electricity that comes from renewable sources. The Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, will increase 3% annually from 2025 to 2029 to reach 40% by 2030. It requires an additional 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind, bringing the state's total target to 5,600 megawatts. It improves access to solar through low-income services solar program trust. It requires $12 million in annual funding be given to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to help environmental justice populations, minority-owned and women-owned businesses, and employees from the fossil fuel industry advance in the clean energy industry. It also improves gas pipeline safety, including increased fines for safety violations. It establishes a pilot program to deploy geothermal heat pump microdistricts. It reshapes the Department of Public Utilities, the DPU, by amending its mission. The DPU will now need to balance equity and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions with its existing priorities of system safety, system security, reliability, and affordability. And finally, it also requires municipal light plants, which serve specific cities or towns, to purchase 50% of their power from non-carbon sources by 2030 and get to net zero emissions by 2050. Before this, municipal light plants did not have renewable energy requirements. That's it in a nutshell. Before I hand the mic to Nathan, so he can give us a fast overview of why we need to act so fast, I want to say that 350 Mass is part of a really cool statewide coalition called Mass Renews Alliance, MARA, that brings together over 80 organizations and communities with a deep stake in the overlapping crises of climate change, social and racial justice, and economic inequality. The MARA coalition is part of the Renew New England Alliance and the National Green New Deal Network. And so 350 Mass is special as a climate organization because we have launched and nurtured and are working hand in glove with this coalition, with Community Labor United, with Neighbor to Neighbor, with SEU 32BJ, with the Native American Indian Council of Boston, NICOB, Disability Policy Consortium, and American Federation of Teachers. And this wonderful alliance is supporting a bill called Building Justice with Jobs that will do many of the things the roadmap bill requires. We will hear more about that bill later on, but you did not come here to hear me. And so let me now introduce our special guests in the order in which they will be speaking. Nathan Phillips is a physiological ecologist who studies land-climate interactions in terrestrial ecosystems and human-dominated environments, including exchanges of energy, water, and greenhouse gases, including methane and carbon dioxide exchange between the air and leaves, soil, buildings, humans, and pipelines. He works with advocates, community members, and policymakers to apply his research to advance sustainable communities and a habitable planet. And last, but certainly not least, Mike Barrett is the state senator for Bedford, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Concord, Lincoln, Waltham, Weston, and large parts of Lexington and Sudbury. He serves as Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and the body in the Massachusetts legislature charged with legislating on climate change and clean energy. He also serves as assistant majority leader of the Democrats in the state Senate. He was the chief architect of the Next Gen Climate Roadmap. Hooray, which positions Harvey, please silence your iPhone.
Energizes our heating systems.
I'm sorry. Harvey,
Right.
please silence your phone. I need someone else to do this. Sorry. So, and he is a graduate of Harvard College magna cum laude and the Northeastern University School of Law and is a member of the Massachusetts Bar. He lives in Lexington, is a father of two. Welcome to you both. And Nathan, I will hand it to you first so that you can tell us why this is so incredibly urgent.
Okay, well, thank you, Sabina. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And thank you to 350 Mass for organizing this session. Senator Barrett, thank you for all your work on the climate, the groundbreaking climate bill. It's a pleasure to share the forum with you. So I have the unenviable task of giving you a rundown on a very daunting report with lots of daunting numbers in it. And that's the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, the 6th assessment report that was released in August. And maybe the most daunting number for me to try to encapsulate this is it's 3,949 pages long. So in a few minutes, it's really, really challenging to try to give you a sense. But I go back to my colleague from Lund University, Professor Kimberly Nicholas, who does her Climate 101. And it's very simple. There's 5 points. And it applies to this report as it has to previous IPCC reports. Number 1, it's warming. Number 2, it's us. Number 3, we're even more sure with this report. Number 4, it's bad. It's a serious.
Oops, sorry, Nathan, you have to unmute again. Sorry, I tried to mute someone else and.
No worries.
Sorry.
Yeah. So number 3 was we're sure that the humans are the cause. It's bad. Number 4, it's a serious, urgent issue, even more than in previous reports. And number 5, we can fix this problem. I think I might temper that to say that there's a lot we can do to reduce the damage that's already baked into where we are. The sum total of this report is that we cannot build new fossil fuel infrastructure. That's clear as day coming out of every aspect of this report. The language that's used in the IPCC report indicates more certainty and more urgency. Words like unequivocal, widespread and rapid change in the atmosphere, in the ocean, in the cryosphere, and in the biosphere. Unprecedented change has occurred. And so the level of urgency in the language and the level of certainty of our impacts is more enhanced than ever. Also, another thing that has become more clear is the ability for us to attribute extreme events, whether that's the fires on the West Coast that we've seen this year, the intensity of hurricanes and storm surge. We can actually now scientifically attribute the excess climate change aspect to how much more intense these events are. Okay, so again, what we cannot do is build new fossil fuel infrastructure. And how that plays out in Massachusetts is that we have pending and recently completed fossil fuel infrastructure that we really cannot have, and we need to mobilize every tool that we have, from policy to advocacy to political pressure, to stop projects like the Charlton LNG project, which is going through a process of permitting right now. We have to stop that new fossil fuel infrastructure. The Peabody Peaker plant, which you may have heard about, we cannot have that new fossil fuel infrastructure built. That's in the process right now of being decided as well. So we need to mobilize against that. The Eversource reliability, so-called reliability project, which would build an entire new fossil gas pipeline into Springfield, that cannot be built. That is inconsistent with the IPCC 6th assessment report. And the Weymouth compressor station, which is under a temporary operation commissioning order right now, that was clearly never needed to satisfy domestic gas consumption, and that facility needs to be shut down at its soonest opportunity. So there's a lot that we have to say no to a lot of things, but we also have to say yes to a lot of things, and we have solutions that we really need to work positively for. But that's also something that we have to be careful about, because there are genuine solutions and then there are some false solutions. And I'm going to start off with the false solutions, because there is a lot of hype associated with a couple technological things that are coming online. One, you may have heard a lot about hydrogen and what's called blue hydrogen. That is a false climate solution. I'll define that in just a second. That goes along hand in hand with something called carbon capture and storage, CCS. That is also a false climate solution that we cannot have. Okay, this blue hydrogen is really, you can think of it as laundered fossil fuels. Hydrogen, when you combust it, it doesn't release any CO2. So that sounds great. It sounds like a clean gas that you can combust. But how you get that hydrogen, about 99% of that hydrogen comes from fossil fuel, from fracked gas. And what they're doing, that fracked gas is methane, and they're stripping the hydrogens off of that methane. Methane is CH4. It's got a lot of hydrogens in it. And so what they do is they use heat and pressure in a process called steam reformation to get that hydrogen off of the methane. But that takes methane burned to generate those high temperatures and pressures to drive that reaction, creating CO2. We also know there's a lot of leaks of methane across the process chain, all the way from the well pad to where they're making this so-called blue hydrogen. And the last thing that they do with this is they try to capture the CO2 that is coming off of this process and bury it. And that's something that takes electricity. So there's carbon emissions with that. This is like a Rube Goldberg type of thing to launder the fracked gas, to clean it up. And a study that was published in August by Bob Howarth and Mark Jacobson from Stanford and Cornell added it up and showed that this so-called blue hydrogen, the carbon footprint of the blue hydrogen is worse than if you just burned the fracked gas to start with. So it is really a false solution. And so what are the solutions that we have? Well, we need to electrify everything. We need to electrify the heating sector in our buildings. And we can do this. We have the tools to do this. We have the ability to assess the electric capacity of our homes and buildings right now to protect against gas shocks and outages like what happened in the Merrimack Valley in 2018. We know how to do that. And we also now know how to transition ourselves in a strategic and cost-effective way off of the dirty and unsafe gas distribution network onto clean and safe electrically based heating that leverages the thermal energy right in the ground and in the air using ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. And it's very exciting that our allies with the Gas Leak Allies, and shout out to the home energy efficiency team, HEAT, have forged these solutions with networked geothermal. We call them geoblocks. It's a scalable model, cost-effective model to transition to clean and safe energy. So I'm not trying to say that this is easy work. It's very hard work, but I think that we sometimes conflate hard with complicated. The task before us is hard, but it's actually pretty simple in some ways because we have the tools, we know what those tools are, and if we're willing to put in the hard work, we can actually get this clean energy transition done. So I'll just stop at that point and pass the mic over to the senator. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nathan. That was a terrific.
Oops. Senator, now you're muted for some reason.
I want to thank 350.mass because you guys really are on the front lines of an issue that's going to be increasingly local, right? The feds can do, the international community can do a certain amount. I'm headed off to Glasgow for COP 26 in a couple of weeks. We've got to see coordination among all the countries of the globe, especially the wealthy ones. A lot can be done nationally, a lot can be done by states, but in the end, for reasons that I hope to underline in a minute, where 350.mass lives, which is in the neighborhoods, in the towns and in the cities, that's going to be the most important front in battling climate change of all. I also want to give a special shout out to Carmen Gentile, who's probably still washing dishes, but presumably still listening to us because Carmine was key in putting the Climate Act through in the House. Here's the way I try to keep things simple, and I'm going to borrow a theme that Nathan articulated so well. There is a sense in which this stuff is awful gnarly, but another in which it's very simple, and it's good to keep your mind free of the clutter of detail sometimes. So here's what I tell myself. Massachusetts is different than the United States, interestingly, in the way in its emissions, and different yet again from the world. Emissions in the world are very complicated. For example, and I'm looking at a pie chart, worldwide, 24% of all our emissions are associated with agriculture, which is pretty extraordinary. Industry accounts for another 21%, and this is from the 2014 IPCC report. Nathan summarized the 2021 report. They don't produce these breakdowns of worldwide emissions in every report. The data that we've been able to get that is most recent, for good or for ill, is 2014. Huge proportion of worldwide emissions attributable to agriculture, including cows and livestock, and a significant amount, of course, attributable to industry. Now let's take a look at Massachusetts. Our agricultural emissions, 0.3%. And this is more recent data. This is 2017. There's still a significant data lag, but agriculture is not the problem in Massachusetts for reasons you can surmise just by looking around you than it is in the world. We are a knowledge-based economy. There are some bad aspects to that, but some good ones as well. So industry is not a significant source of emissions. We have, statistically speaking, very few smokestacks left. Industrial emissions are only 10% of the game for us. What's left are residential buildings, commercial and industrial buildings, transportation, and the generation of electricity itself. So if you want to really simplify the challenge in front of us, you could say, quite logically, that the solution for Massachusetts, our contribution to tackling a global problem, is to put electric buses through every urban neighborhood and to put an electric car in about 90% of the driveways and in front of about 90% of the apartments and condos in Massachusetts. EVs have to be everywhere. Now think of the affordability issue that we currently confront And think of the range anxiety and the question of whether we're going to be able to charge these things overnight if we don't have a garage of our own. But fundamentally, in one way or another, we've got to tackle the question of electrifying transportation. And then we've got to tackle the question, as Nathan says, of electrifying buildings. And this is both business and residential. And finally, we've got to make sure that all that electricity that we route through our cars, our buses, and our heating systems in the basement, that the electricity is clean, right? So green the grid, green transportation, and green buildings, and you've got the Massachusetts contribution to a worldwide problem licked. That simplifies the task, but also focuses on some of the challenges we face. And the challenges are going to be significant. Every one of them is overcomable, but, and this is a thought question that each of you can answer in your heads. Look around your neighborhood right now in Metro West and ask in a very concrete way, because you know yourselves, you know your children and grandkids, you know your neighbors. What would it take to make 90% of the rolling stock in your neighborhood electric? Get it off gasoline. And then think about what's in the basement, the gas system or the oil system. I have neighbors who are very smart, who have advanced degrees, who care about the climate a great deal. But when the oil system gives out in November in the basement, and this has happened to friends of mine, they don't call me and say, gee, we feel like we have 72 hours in which to act. The place is already cold. What do we do? They make the decision based on what's top of mind, and they go for propane. They never think of heat pumps, quite frankly. And these are life sciences researchers. Their heads are totally into chemistry or biochemistry. They've scarcely heard about heat pumps. They go to a new and more efficient fossil fuel system, which of course perpetuates the jam in which we find ourselves. So if the well-educated folks of Metro West, who kind of read the newspapers and pride themselves on being up to speed, don't even think about the electric alternative, we've got a marketing problem. Now, marketing is something that Americans know how to do. That's why I remain so optimistic about our ability to tackle this problem. But fundamentally, we have an issue with respect to buildings that we don't have with respect to cars. Elon Musk, whom I don't like, is a brilliant marketer. So because of him and a variety of other things, all of our neighbors and our family members know about electric vehicles, even when we don't own them, even when we can't afford them. But the awareness, the product awareness is there. And we all know, because we hear about it, it's always just around the corner, there's going to be a variety of makes and models made available by the likes of General Motors and Ford very soon. It was supposed to have happened in 2021. But in any event, it's always happening very soon that we'll have a terrific selection from which. Now, that's not true for heat pumps, right? No one relative to the knowledge of electric vehicles has heard about electric heating. And I'm not talking about old-fashioned baseboard heating, which is very expensive. I'm talking about new, efficient, and clean heat pumps, so-called either air source or ground source. So you've got a marketing issue. There's no Elon Musk for buildings, right? We're going to have to substitute for the evil genius of Elon Musk when it comes to getting the word out and figure out how to educate our neighbors. And that's why, again, 350 Mass, you're right on the front lines, because you can begin to conjure with the communications challenge that we have. So green the grid, green buildings, and green transportation. This is all going to be, in the end, fueled by money at the national and state level, but it all has to be executed fundamentally in a town by town way, city neighborhood by city neighborhood. There's a new group, and these are the sort of solutions that you're going to, I think, find yourselves part of. There's a new group called Mass Energize. How many folks here have heard of Mass Energize? As it happens, it began in Concord. It hopes to extend out to other communities and to find its way into cities as well. Mass Energize is beginning with detailed websites town by town to acquaint people with buying an EV. And it's very situationally specific, right? So it's shopping for an electric vehicle in Sudbury. Where are the dealers? How do you test drive a Tesla? Do you think about a Chevrolet Bolt? Do you hope that other makes are going to emerge? How do you shop for a heat pump in Sudbury as well? And by the way, just to give you a sense as to why this is more than a communications issue, though it has to start in the case of heat pumps with marketing, we have some preliminary data. Amherst, Massachusetts, as wife and I replaced a single picture window. It cost us $4,000 last year to get a triple paned, and that was a single window, albeit large sized. Insulation that's 6 inches in the walls rather than 3, triple paned windows, probably new doors, and the usual stuff, insulation in the attic. Very expensive if you've got an older drafty house. And then you turn to the fact that at the moment, you don't have the infrastructure for heat pumps. If you want to do geothermal, if you want to take the heat out 500 feet below your house, and it does exist, that drilling is going to cost you a significant amount of money. You're going to need help as a practical matter paying for that, right? If you go with air source heat pumps, which are wall-based units, although there's an exterior component as well, air source heat pumps aren't as efficient as ground source heat pumps. You'll probably need 3 or 4 for your house, depending on how large it is. You're going to have some HVAC issues. The air source heat pump is probably going to cost you, by the time you outfit your entire home, $10,000 to $20,000. Now, the good news is that today's cold weather heat pumps will keep you warm on all but the very coldest days of winter, right? They've gotten better and better. The latest data suggests that heat pumps can work at decreasing efficiency at 5 below. There's one more wrinkle, and I'll just mention it only because I'm trying to reinforce a general point here. As the days get colder and colder, the heat pumps, especially the air source ones, get less and less efficient, which means you actually have to run more and more electricity to operate the heat pump and to suck the heat out of the cold air in winter or the cool air out of the hot air in summer. The efficiency goes down. The cost of running the systems go up. There's even a point where, unless the grid is clean, you could wind up emitting as much because of your reliance on dirty electricity as you avoid emitting because you've moved off natural gas or oil. This is all by way of saying that the technology is available, but the cost to working class people and to middle class people and to poor people is a problem where we haven't yet made the breakthroughs we need to make. So you've got a marketing issue in Metro West where some of your neighbors could afford to do all of this. They could afford to lay out $50,000, $25,000 to make the energy envelope, the building envelope tight, and another $25,000 to install the system and perform some aesthetics, because you're going to have to plug some holes and create others in your walls. There are some of your neighbors who can afford to do this, but even in Metro West, we're going to have a significant challenge in terms of affordability. Now, we've got to get there anyway. So how might we make the transition? And here's where, again, we need creative thinkers within your organization. I think we're going to do it one community at a time. We're going to have demonstration communities. It could be Brookline, it could be Concord, it could be Acton. We're going to have communities that decide as a matter of town meeting or city council vote that they want to move into this frontier that's reassuring in terms of the technology, less reassuring in terms of affordability. These towns are going to generate early data that the rest of us are going to learn from, including data about whether we can bring those costs down as the quantity of heat pump installation goes up, right? And we realize economies of scale. We start to train the workforce to install these things so the installations get better and better. The early communities are going to decide, are going to opt in voluntarily and then become eligible for state and I hope federal grants to help families make the transitions that I'm talking about. It goes without saying, by the way, that the place where we've got to start right away is with new construction. Because when I talk about the expense that I've just referenced, the expenses, I'm talking about retrofitting. Things become more affordable if you're building from scratch. That's why the ability of an individual community to say no to new natural gas hookups becomes so crucial, right? And the local option net zero stretch energy code required by the Climate Act and described so well by by Sabine earlier, and must enable the individual community to figure out how to do heat pumps in all new construction and to say no to extending natural gas into Massachusetts any more than it already is. That new construction piece is key. Now, just to add to our agenda for action, in September, the Baker administration was supposed to drop a straw proposal, a draft of a possible local option net zero stretch energy code, which they must have completed after 5 public hearings and made available to the public by the end of next year. So they've got 15 months left. They're 2 months late in dropping the straw proposal. I think they know that if their version of a straw proposal that we're to react to doesn't permit communities to say no to new natural gas hookups, there will be an explosion of unhappiness. The Baker people don't have to say no to natural gas themselves if they don't want to. But they do have to give individual communities the option of grappling with no natural gas for new construction on their own. They've got to let us pioneer and to grapple with some of the genuine issues involved, even if they don't want to embrace it themselves as statewide policy. If they don't give individual towns the right to opt in to a no new natural gas energy code, they've foreclosed our ability to really deal with the emissions that we're going to confront. So in terms of accumulating knowledge so that all of us can climb a learning curve, we start with a net zero stretch code where a community could opt in and on its own decide what Brookline attempted to do 2 years ago, no new natural gas hookups. And then the same communities, but in a separate decision-making process, need to decide that they also want to begin the more difficult effort to retrofit current construction with heat pumps. That's where this affordability issue that I referenced earlier comes in. So we need to have a way to enable families to do this. You know, the last thing I want to say, because I want to open this up to questions and comments, is that COVID is instructive about what we're going to confront if we can't get communities to make this transition rather quickly on their own. You know, you start out offering a vaccine and taking it is voluntary. And then when you don't get enough buy-in and the pandemic continues, if you're Massachusetts state government, even in the hands of a moderate Republican governor, you implement mandates. You say that if you want to remain employed by the state of Massachusetts, you must have a vaccination. The same thing is going to happen as we deal with this terrible scourge of climate change. We've got a brief window where the action can be voluntary and where we can preserve the freedom to opt in and the freedom of decision-making that entails. But if we don't get sufficient penetration of heat pumps or of electric vehicles, mandates will quickly follow, and people are going to feel constrained in terms of their choices. And that's going to lead to some significant unhappiness in that proportion of the population that is libertarian and that takes pride in not.
Senator,
To avoid that greater incidence of social conflict by forging ahead very aggressively now to let towns go through a deliberative process, a debate in town meeting, aware that there are federal and state grants to help them pioneer in this transition, and aware that avoiding natural gas heating in new construction is actually the most affordable way to go, and if you will, the low-hanging fruit. So there are other ideas we can talk about. I mentioned Mass Energize at the very beginning. Mass Energize is essentially putting up content-oriented websites, town by town, to enable all of us to go, and as I say, to have a reliable reference with respect to heating our homes with electricity, putting electric cars in our driveway. I'm in the state budget that went by, you know, it's sort of quiet, but every politician gets a certain number of local earmarks. Because Concord originated Mass Energize, even though it's now proliferating all around Metro West and I hope beyond, I used my local earmarking option to fund Mass Energize. I want them gearing up quickly so that they're operative in your community with information about your housing stock and how you and your neighbors can afford to go electric in terms of your heating. So that's how I'm using the modest amount of optional spending that they gave to me. There's one other thing I want to say. I think it was Sabine again mentioned this wonderful organization, well, that works with Mothers Out Front, HEAT, H-E-E-T. Nathan, maybe you mentioned HEAT as well. So HEAT needs $5 million to gather data on district heating, which would be a way to avoid natural gas heating. District heating essentially does heat pumps, but links an entire street into a network so that the warm air, the water system underlying a neighborhood can join buildings together. You could also drill those deep geothermal boreholes to suck up heat from the Earth's center and share that with a neighborhood. HEAT needed, and the Gas Leaks Alliance needed $5 million to gather data from certain pilot programs involving district heating that Eversource and National Grid have agreed to engage in. So I hope that some of the ARPA money, there is one pot of federal money that has already been appropriated by Congress that had to do with our recovering from the original economic hit COVID imposed on us. So it doesn't have to do with the current debates in Congress. ARPA money is going to be appropriated in the next 2 weeks. I'd like to see $5 million allocated to HEAT to evaluate the district heating pilots, which are taking place but don't have a data gathering and a data analysis component joined to them yet. So if you want to know what I'm doing every day in the State House, it's getting a little money for Mass Energize, trying to fund and finance the data gathering and analysis component of, for district heating. There are all kinds of problems that need to be solved, but a lot of the stuff involves neighbor to neighbor. You're talking to folks on your street once you know yourself enough about heat pumps to feel good about them, and then are searching together for ways to enable families to afford the installations. I'm going to close there. I hope I haven't gone over too much, and look forward to a discussion.
No, that was wonderful, Senator. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to see a heat pump in the flesh, so to speak, I'm happy to have anyone come to my house and check it out. I've had it for a number of years and I have survived the worst winters. I have a backup wood stove if needed, but I have no fossil fuels coming into my house. So it's absolutely possible. I absolutely agree with you. And I should add that Kat van der Straeten, who is one of the co-founders of Mass Energize, also was a co-founder of 350 Mass Metro West. So she clearly knows what she's doing and we count her as one of us. Thank you for this this overview of the many things that are still on our to-do list. And I think you're speaking to the right people here in this room, in this Zoom room, who are indeed active on the local level. We've collected a number of questions already. As people may have noticed, my computer froze. And so I'm now on my cell phone. I don't dare to shut down the computer because I'm the host of this meeting and I'm afraid it will shut down the meeting for all of you. So I will stay on my phone, which makes it a little bit more complicated to be on multiple screens at once. But if Debbie will help me with muting people who shouldn't be speaking, that would be wonderful. Kurt Newton asked a question just now that I thought we might want to start with. And that is, do you think that we actually, given the urgency that Nathan summarized for us, do we actually need a lot more than just neighborly conversations? Is it time for much more stringent mandates?
Yes, I think it's close to time, but this is going to be politically tricky if you're talking about the nation. If you're talking about Massachusetts, things are a little more manageable, but I also think things could go wrong. So, for example, the mandate that's available to us, one of them is no sales of internal combustion engine cars after a given year. But of course, if you do that for Massachusetts, you have what the economists would call a problem of leakage. You have New Hampshire ready to go hog wild with advertising, luring Massachusetts automobile dealers to New Hampshire to buy cars, which would continue to be internal combustion engine. Whoops. So that's going to be a real problem. But we can bar cars. You're going to risk, even in Massachusetts, you're going to risk a conservative rebellion, although I think, for one, that if we have 5 years of much more generous incentives to buy EVs, we only give you $2,500 toward your purchase today. I think another proposal I've made for spending ARPA money would double that to $5,000. At the same time, I want us to fund the first generation of electric buses in urban areas where people may not even be able to afford cars. So we need to pair the electrification of mass transit with the electrification of the single passenger vehicle. But there's no question that we need to have the mandate lurking in the background. But here's where we could go. I'll give you an example of how politically tough this is going to be. Right now, it's very popular to talk about lifting the so-called price cap in the pricing of offshore wind. Southeastern Mass wants to see some onshore jobs. The developers of the windmills off the coast of Massachusetts, that certainly would be clean energy, have made it very clear that there's a trade-off. It's almost perfect. If you want more onshore jobs, that is a less economic or less efficient choice for the developers, all of whom are based in Europe, where they already have manufacturing facilities that they can barge over the product to the East Coast of the United States. But if you want to duplicate that manufacturing capacity and build stuff here, you have to let electric rates for Massachusetts ratepayers go up. Now consider how, and there are lots of politicians in Southeastern Mass who think we should do precisely that. Now consider the dilemma. You're going to electrify cars, which means you're going to be using a lot of electricity every night to recharge. You're going to electrify your home heating system. We've got the highest electric rates, or the fourth highest in the United States already, but we don't use a lot of electricity so far because we don't run air conditioning the way they do in the Sun Belt. Now we're going to start to use a lot of electricity to electrify our cars and our heating. So volume consumption is going to go up. Per unit consumption is already very high, and lifting the so-called price cap to encourage more onshore jobs for Southeastern Massachusetts is going to cause those electric rates to go higher for the entire state yet again. So what's the trade-off between jobs for Southeastern Mass, a place we want to help? It's a blue-collar place where people would love to have these jobs, versus raising electricity. The last thing I'll say is that I entered Massachusetts politics. I was first elected, this is going to date me, in 1978. 1978, the next year, California passed Proposition 2.5. which is a rebellion in already a blue state against high property taxes. Even in a blue state, people can get nasty and elect the Ronald Reagans of the world. The next year, during my first term as a state rep, Massachusetts emulated California and passed Proposition 2.5. Ratepayers in already blue Massachusetts decided they had had enough with liberal government. So I have seen, and we needed those high property taxes at the time to fund better quality local schools. I've seen liberal Massachusetts and liberal California suddenly pull a 180 if some basic necessities get too expensive. So I'm watching this electric rate debate. The idea that rates may need to go up to create onshore jobs at the same time that the volume consumption is going to go sky high because we're putting electric cars in the driveway and electric heating systems in the basement. I'm watching this debate very carefully. And I only mention it to you guys because this is going to be very tough politically. We can have mandates, as I think Sabine asked, but if you choose the wrong mandate and you really piss people off, we're going to elect people to the right of Charlie Baker in a succession of governorships. This is tough stuff, and we have to always look for the elusive balance.
Thank you. Can you elaborate? Someone asked on the gas hookup ban, because we know Berkeley has done it, right? And they even weathered a legal challenge. Brookline has also tried it, and they have been told they don't have that power. So who has the power, and what
Oh,
do you think?
We're changing state law. That's why
Right.
I wrote the net zero local option energy code, the new provision, in order to legalize what Brookline wants to do.
Mm-hmm. And then would that mean that the state can also, so then towns could go alone, and what you said
but we need
earlier
the Baker administration to produce, right? The Baker
so they
administration has some latitude here. If they write this local option net zero stretch energy code too restrictively, they may thwart us. That's why I'm watching for this straw proposal, and why we all have to read it carefully and react very strongly if it precludes Brookline from doing what Brookline would like to do.
What could we all do to help push?
There are 5 public hearings. They're going to drop a proposal, but then they're going to hear from us on 5 occasions. We need to flood those 5 hearings and make it clear that localities have got to have the ability to say no to no new natural gas for new construction. That's what's at issue. Now, at one point, and I hope that this has been superseded since, a very high-ranking Baker administration official told me flatly that my language would not include the ability of localities to say no to new natural gas. So I believe we can change minds over there, but only through a show of determination.
Do we already know when these meetings will be?
No, they need to drop this draft, and they're 2 months late, but there is a deadline. The whole schmear has to be done by, so happens, Christmas Day 2022. The administration, though, promises that they're going to act much sooner than that. So we're essentially talking about a 15-month window, the rest of this year and all of next. But then there's a drop dead deadline. They've got to give localities the option that I'm talking about. The question is, how do they draft it, and do they get too restrictive on us?
Right. So that's what we all need to look for. Don't worry if you don't see me in between. That's me going to the questions document so that I can read the questions. So let's see. What are other legal remedies, maybe attorney general remedies that could be taken if deadlines are not adhered to by the administration?
You know, I'll tell you, the deadlines that we set have been met so far. I'm not going to be gloomy about their failing to meet deadlines. I think they want to comply with the law. I think it's good that we stiffen their backbone and set the deadlines. I believe they'll be met. Now, let me give you an example of a place where, and when I say a a lot of this bill was a group effort, but some of it really was myself and my staff. We decided that the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, which sets state building codes and energy codes, was hopelessly behind the times. We don't have time to go. It's an entirely volunteer board. It has no professional staff. Everybody who serves on the board is a town official somewhere in Massachusetts, and yet they're now in charge of the energy codes, which we've been discussing. So I wrote language that said, Baker, you've got 11 members of this board today. We want you to have 15 Commissioner of Department of Energy Resources, and then 3 green energy experts. I basically packed the board. We sometimes talk about packing the Supreme Court. We packed the board. Now, if my colleagues hadn't liked the idea, it wouldn't have gone anyplace because I have no power myself. But I put the proposal, I should say, to my colleagues, and they were up for it. So now there's a 15-member board, but the Gov has to appoint 3 green energy advocates, and then the Commissioner of DOER has to take his place as well. The governor hasn't made the appointments. I didn't think to set a deadline for the governor. Now, I'm not saying he's going to resist for too much longer, but the thing was passed, was effective June 25th, 2021. We're now in October. He hasn't made the 3 green energy appointments to this very powerful but low profile Board of Building Regulations and Standards. So of course, I'm watching that one. But he has a deadline for the stretch energy code, so we're good.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I appreciate that you said that that we don't have to worry about the deadlines. What I said at the beginning, though, is, if the roadmap is more of a blueprint and we really need to fill it now with life, I mentioned the housing for jobs and justice housing bill that the Mara coalition has put forward. 350 Mass actually itself has put forward a voucher bill for to get rid of clunkers to basically.
Sabine, let me answer you. I know where you're going, so let me just say with respect to that, I think it's more than a blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll leave the choice of vocabulary up to you guys. Actually, you may want to attach a word to what I'm about to say, and there may be a dozen different terms. But here's what we did. For example, we recognize that the game in Massachusetts is transportation, buildings, and clean power. Mm-hmm. So we said, Governor, right now you have to set a limit on total emissions every 10 years. We're going to bring it close to home. It's going to be every 5 from now on. But more than that, you're going to have to set sublimits. You're going to have to tell us, you're going to have to set a sublimits for residential heating as part of the overall limit for 2025. And she has to set, the Executive Office Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs has to set sublimits for residential heating, that's number 1, for commercial heating, number 2, for electric power, number 3, for transportation, number 4, for industrial processes, number 5, and cutting across all of these because I'm so concerned about it, natural gas infrastructure and services, number 6. By next June, which is 9 months from now, she's going to have to set sublimits for each of these areas, which requires her to be very careful in her thinking, because we go on to say mm-hmm. that the setting of these sublimits has to be accompanied by a plan, and the statutory language says clear, comprehensive, and specific. So she has to be specific about how she's going to tackle, let's say, the transportation issue. We go even further again. We say, look, you're, as part of this plan, which is also due in the next 9 months to implement the sublimits, you're going to have to set numerical benchmarks for electric vehicles. I'm now reading from my legislative list: electric vehicle charging stations, solar photovoltaics, energy storage, air source and ground source heat pumps, anaerobic digesters, and carbon sequestration by natural and working lands. So she has 10 numerical goals that she has to present to us, which are in service to these 6 sublimits that are very finely detailed and fixed to the Massachusetts economy, all of which have to help us realize the overall limit. This has to
Right.
happen by June of 2022 for 2025, and then she has to do it on a full 5-year cycle for 2030, 2035, 2040, et cetera, all building toward net zero by 2050. We're trying to really hold her feet to the fire by being as specific as possible. So I think it's more than a blueprint, but
Mhm.
less than a total solution, because what we haven't figured out is, how is everyone on your street going to be able to afford an electric vehicle? How are we going to help them do that? That's the
Right,
part.
and-
How is everyone going to afford a heat pump in the basement?
Right, and so, I mean, because the reason I called it a blueprint is that, you know, there are a record number of climate bills in the legislature this year, right? And in order to basically ensure that the targets that the roadmap bill anticipates and lays out can be met, so that, would you not agree with that? Would you say we don't
Well, it's kind of
actually
a,
need more
you know, the timing always gets messed. All those bills were written before the Climate Act was signed by the governor. Actually, all those bills were filed before people knew there was going to be a Climate Act.
Mhm.
So a lot of what's in the bills that we love are actually already law, or they're redundant in terms of what the Climate Act finally. Remember, what happened here is that I've got to file my bills by around, maybe Carmen can help me out, by around January 15th of every odd numbered year. So
Mhm.
everybody was drafting these bills in November and December of 2020, looking toward a bill filing deadline after New Year's. Well, the Climate Act didn't get announced until something like January 3rd. It was the last day of the session. Then the governor vetoed it. We got
Right.
it back in the first 2 months of 2021, and we wrote new stuff into it. We actually made it tougher instead of more lenient as he had hoped. And we submitted it to him again. So all the stuff that's pending before my committee was written before people knew there was going to be a landmark climate bill. Some of the stuff in those bills are genuinely new. A lot of it isn't, and we're going to have to kind of sort through. I hope that there's going to be a new climate bill in this session, to your point, Sabine. But the stuff as written is redundant in many respects.
So, for example, the building with jobs and justice, you don't think that bill is needed?
No, ideas in those bills. I don't pretend to know section by section about that particular piece of legislation, but ideas in those bills are going to be very important. But we need to extract them. So the bill won't go anywhere because it's duplicative, but particular ideas in the bills might be very valuable. And I will rely on you guys to go over the Climate Act and then go over some of the new bills and isolate for us the genuinely new ideas that would fill in interstices that we didn't address in the climate bill. Because certainly what we've done so far needs improving on.
Okay, well, so there's a question: which non-redundant bills do you think we should promote?
Well, there are all kinds of ideas that we have to tackle. For example, and now I'm going to be somewhat eclectic here. I want a new law that increases the subsidy that you get again for buying an electric vehicle. One way or the other, we've got to give you a boost because these electric vehicles are too expensive. They're still on average $40,000 to $50,000. I want to see us electrify buses in city neighborhoods. Remember, I'm very nitty gritty here. It's everything I do, I hope, as an individual legislator, has to electrify transportation, electrify buildings, or electrify the grid. It's got to be very solution oriented. We've already set enough general goals. What we need now is implementation. So if you present me a bill, and forgive me, but I'm just sort of freelancing. If you present me a bill that says we should have all clean power by 2030, I'm going to be respectful to that, but I'm going to be much more interested in if you tell me, and here's exactly how we're going to do it. So we've got to really focus not on goal setting, which the Climate Act is full of, but on execution. So I want to know how we're going to enable you to afford an electric vehicle, actually two, if you're a two-car family. How we're going to enable your poorer neighbor to afford them as well. How we're going to electrify the T. How we're going to mass save is crucial because mass save is our market. Remember I said that we need an Elon Musk for buildings. Mass save is the best marketing tool we've got, and it's run by the utilities. So I'm interested in further reforms of mass save that make it clear that the utilities are not running our leading energy efficiency program. We need more incentives within mass save to help you convert to a heat pump from oil or gas, right? So this is all solution focused. A lot of it involves money, but some of it involves further institutional changes, as in the case of our energy efficiency program that I just mentioned. You know, then there are some just extraneous ideas that matter a lot, let's say, to the poor people. There's still a lot of door-to-door marketing of electric power alternatives, supposedly to Eversource and National Grid, that reduce my monthly bill up front, but have a huge balloon payment that I'm going to owe the substitute, the so-called competitive supplier, at the end of 5 years. I want to outlaw, and so does the Attorney General, door-to-door, face-to-face marketing by so-called suppliers who compete ostensibly with Eversource, but actually are more expensive than Eversource, if you can believe it. So there are some discrete things we've got to do of that kind. In all, Sabina, I think there are 15 to 20 ideas that we can draw upon. I could actually, I want you to know that on my desktop here, as I'm speaking to you, I have a Word document called 2022 Climate Bill, potential components. Now, I'm only one legislator. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
But for example, I'm very concerned to remove biomass from a list of qualifying renewable energy resources. It actually does exist there today. That's crazy that biomass is still on a list of what qualifies to be clean energy. We need to expand the bottle bill to include, the plastic bottles that Poland Spring is sold in. We need to, I think, gather a lot more data on energy use in our business buildings. You know, we really don't have a statewide inventory on what businesses, how businesses produce energy and how much they use. So we need some statewide databases as a prelude to our getting our commercial and industrial buildings off fossil fuels. Becca Rausch and Maria Robinson put forward a terrific bill to build up our databases around commercial and industrial building use that I was unable to get into the climate bill. It actually, it was shot down. So I think consciousness has been raised since then, and I hope to reinsert commercial and industrial energy data gathering as part of a new climate act. So there are, again, it's pretty nitty gritty, but it's where we need to go.
What can be done about the fact that the gas industry has been asked to basically write its own future, as was recently reported, that the gas industry gets the first bite at writing how we get off gas? I mean, that's
it's very regrettable. You know, I think the Baker people are very embarrassed by those Globe pieces, which I encouraged and was able to help with a little bit, and written by a brilliant new reporter for the Globe. So yeah, it's a twofold thing. They're framing the initial scenarios for the future of gas you're talking about, but they also hired all the consultants. Now that's you say to yourself, I saw the Baker people hire their own consultants to put together their 2050 clean energy plan. And by the way, what the consultants put together was very good. The Baker people and the governor himself disregarded what their own consultants told them, but the consultants or very aggressive. So the administration is capable of laying out the bucks to hire independent consultants, but they didn't do it. In the case of the future of gas, and in the case of a proceeding before the DPU that the Attorney General began, incomprehensibly, they had the utilities hire the consultants needed to lay out all the scenarios, really to make the case for how quickly we can move off gas. The appearance of conflict of interest, the genuine conflicts are very potentially disturbing. We haven't seen the work products yet, but the appearance of a conflict of interest could have been avoided if the DPU laid out their own money to hire the consultants, and all of us had equal access to those consultants, and provided those consultants talk to us as much as they did to industry. Don't know why that happened. It's become a source of embarrassment to the Baker people. I think they will bend over backwards, I hope, to make sure that that consulting process produces a good result, because if it doesn't, we will all point to the original sin, the fact that industry is the client of record for these consultants, as the reason why the consultants didn't help us out as enough. So this is all part of the political game. The administration makes an error of judgment, we push back.
Here's a question from Christine. How can we retrofit 1 million homes in 10 years?
We can't without massive federal money. This is where the Biden program becomes so important. There isn't enough state money to retrofit. Now, we can do the new construction piece for reasons I've already mentioned. We can't retrofit without massive federal state program. It is a Green New Deal. I mean, the Green New Deal concept is the right idea. Nationwide, Biden needs to come forward with massive amounts of money for middle-class families, working class families, and for tenants. We've got to make sure the landlords don't leave tenants high and dry. So that's why we've got to elect Democrats to the US Senate, to the US House, and to the presidency. And there's no avoiding the important role of our keeping Democrats in office for the entire decade of the 2020s. And we all know how daunting that may prove to be.
There is another question here. How can we get the DPU to approve municipal aggregation plans faster so we can clean our town's electricity? There has been little movement over the past year.
That strikes me as a very detailed question. It's very town specific, and I'm not going to try a general answer except to say this. As you all know, because Sabine, you described it so well, for 100 years, we've had a DPU, which regulates your electric rates, the ones that I'm concerned are going to rise too high, and your gas rates, right? Which in a sense, you might say are too low because they're predicated on fracked natural gas that despoils people in other states. But the DPU, because the legislature somehow in a century of creating the agency, never gave it a mission statement, designed their own. And for a century, they've said reliability and affordability, which favors natural gas in some respects, by the way. Reliability of the grid or of the gas system and the affordability of electric and that is all we're going to think about. So we took a look, my staff and I took a look at that. We waded through a very dense set of statutes that govern how the DPU conducts itself. And we realized actually it was kind of a shock. I mean, it was really dreadful when we finally figured out that we had never given them marching orders as a legislature. That was on us. And so we gave them their first set of marching orders. And as you know, it's affordability and price, because both remain very important. But at the same time, it's safety, because look what happened in the Merrimack Valley. It's security, because we've got hackers wanting to take down the electric grid whenever they can. It's equity, because we've got to be mindful of the problem of environmental justice. And then importantly, as the sixth criterion, reductions in natural gas emissions. So the DPU, and this is the answer to your questioner's query, The DPU now has to respond to municipalities, mindful of the fact that reducing emissions is co-equal a priority for itself as an agency in every decision it makes with whatever traditional values the agency thinks it's been serving. At least basically for lawsuit purposes, but really also for administrative purposes and for the purposes of argument, we now have the right standards to challenge the DPU to meet when it deals with towns, but really when it does everything.
Thank you. I realized that I didn't ask Nathan any questions because so many of the questions that came in were for the senator. So apologies to Nathan, but I hope that was understandable. I want to thank you, Senator, for being so willing to give us so much of your time. And my friend Paul, who is the coordinator of the Metro West node, will close us out. He has some announcements, I think, and also any kind of last words. Paul, are you here?
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So Senator, thank you very much for joining us. He's my senator. I'm very proud of him. And thank you everybody who attended and who had questions and who paid attention. I recognize a lot of the names and the faces here. So a lot of you know about 350 Mass, and some of you are participating in the Metro West node. But for anyone who's not, I've put again in the chat a link to a document which has some links in it for your convenience. You can find the 350 Mass website, our node website, and some other information. Our node, the so-called Metro West node, welcomes people from, as Debbie sometimes says, what is it, Framingham and Natick and the towns that touch them and the towns that touch them. So it's very flexible. Of course, now that we're in Zoom world, you can join any node, but eventually we'll be meeting in person again, we hope. We typically meet by Zoom these days about twice a month, the first Thursday and the third Thursday of each month by Zoom at 7 p.m. And the link to that is in that document I put in the chat. Also, you can find out more. Each meeting is a little bit different. We have a newsletter that gives you a heads up which meetings will be about. November 4th, for example, our next meeting, we'll have somebody from the 350 Mass campaign who will talk to us about the housing component. That's one of the big three, right? And what we can do in our region to try to help support progress on that issue in parallel with efforts on the statewide legislative front. So that's an example. So thank you very much everyone for coming. Debbie or Sabina, do you have any other closing comments you want to make?
I do. I thank you very much, Senator. I just wanted to voice one other question that I saw, and that is, what's the one thing that you think all the folks here should be doing to help with the efforts that you're putting forth and other legislators?
I'm impressed, and this is very good news. First of all, I want to thank 350 Mass, and I want to thank the Metro West node for having Nathan and me. This has been interesting. I learned a lot listening to him, and I want to applaud Sabine for her terrific summary. I'm very worried, as you may have inferred, about the financing issue, about the affordability question. So this is a challenge I've already articulated. I can't add to it, but I need ideas from you, and all my colleagues do, because all of us legislate together. And I've used the first person pronoun too often tonight already, and given the misleading impression that this is a one-man band. It is not. It's not a one-person band. It's 200 legislators. So help us figure out how to make electric vehicles ubiquitous, and how we're going to communicate the existence of heat pumps as a viable alternative to those who can afford them. That's a massive job, but I suspect that it's going to be susceptible to very that are solutions that are town by town. I don't mean to be, of course, websites are the way to go these days, but you know, they're going to be a place for leaflets left in coffee shops, assuming that there are any coffee shops left in Massachusetts by the time we're done. We need to get out the awareness of these products, because a lot of people want to be part of the solution. The wonderful thing about Massachusetts is that everyone now acknowledges, there are no deniers to speak of. Everyone is on board and asking the question, Debbie, that you're asking, what do we do? The first thing we do is in a sense to internalize the responsibility. I mean, we need to go electric in our daily lives. That means our clothes dryers. That means our hot water heaters. That means our lawnmowers, as well as our cars.
Thank you. Were you cut off, or did you finish what your thought? I think we've lost you, Senator. You look frozen to me. Can you hear me?
People can definitely stop mowing.
I
Thanks,
think it just
Sabina.
froze.
I think Senator Barrett is frozen, but you seem to almost to be done with your thoughts. So thank you. That's great. And you know, I think all of us here agree that we need to be. We're still the choir, you know, that's being preached to.
House cleaning. And she was like a web person. She said, I write copy really.
We need to be. We need to be talking to everyone we can think of. And spreading the word that this is possible, that we can make this transition, and that everybody can help with it. So just some food for thought as we close out tonight's meeting. Anybody else want to say goodbye?
Everyone can stop mowing their lawn. It brings so many more beautiful critters into your garden, including butterflies and bees and everything. But
All
yeah,
right.
this was great. I apologize for some of the technical glitches, but I hope everyone got something out of this. And I hope very much that you all come back in how many weeks? When are we meeting next? What's the date, Paul?
No,
Yeah, 2 weeks, Thursday, November 4th.
Thursday, November 4th. We will see you at our next Metro West Node meeting, where we will take action. And in the meantime, go look at our website.
thank you, everybody.